Hi, this is Andrew Foreman. This is Disability Connections, a show that helps you make a connection with the disability community. My guest today, Cortland Towns III, who is the Deputy Director and PCA Personal Care Attendant Program Manager. And we will be talking about the Personal Care Attendant Program. And we'd love any comments, questions, 617-708-3290. Again, 617-708-3290. If you have a block number, hit *82. Thank you for coming in, Cortland. Welcome into the connection.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Yeah. So we always talk in acronyms, PCA, Personal Care Attendant. So we may be using that throughout the show.
I'll try not to.
And I will too, but sometimes you bad habits, you kind of. So what is the Personal Care Attendant Program?
The Personal Care Attendant Program has been crucial for people with disabilities to live independently in the community. We at Bcil, we have roughly about 1,200 folks, 1,200 consumers who utilize PCAs on a day-to-day basis to help them in a variety of different ways so that they can live independently in the community. Oftentimes we have folks who say may be in a residential facility or a nursing home, and they want to come out of a nursing home and reintegrate back into the community. Or sometimes it's folks who may have a motor vehicle accident and end up having a disability as a result of that. Or somebody may have something like MS that progresses where they need some hands-on assistance. So really the program serves to provide hands-on personal care assistance, hence the name Personal Care Attendant, but hands-on personal care assistance to people with disabilities.
In what areas? Give our viewers an idea what areas.
Well, in order to be eligible, there's a few ways one has to be eligible to utilize the Mass Health PCA program. The program is funded by Mass Health, and they have certain guidelines and criteria to be able to participate. So the first thing, it has to be a chronic and permanent disability. So if you say you sprained an ankle or you have knee surgery and you might be in rehab for 6 weeks, that's not going to qualify you for personal care attendant services. It has to be something that's chronic or permanent, and it requires hands-on assistance. So someone has to have Mass Health standard, because it's a Mass Health funded program. There are other ways to access it. We can talk about that a bit later if you like. But one has to have Mass Health standard, a permanent or chronic disability, and hands-on needs in 2 activities of daily living. They're called ADLs. So I'm trying not to use the acronyms. Right. So the activities of daily living, things like bathing, dressing, grooming, transferring out of bed into a wheelchair, transferring during toileting or something like that. So it has to be hands-on needs, but there has to be at least 2 of them. So grooming, bathing, dressing, feeding, etc. If someone doesn't have the physical ability to do those tasks, at least 2 of them, then they can be eligible to have a PCA system in those tasks.
So who hires the personal care attendant?
Well, that's kind of the beauty of the PCA program. I mean, there's a lot of different programs out there that provide services in the home. Like VNA, Visiting Nurses Association, things like that. The beauty of the PCA program is that it's a consumer-controlled, consumer-directed program. So the person with the disability is the one who's in charge, right? So the person with the disability is the person who hires the PCAs to come into their home to provide a very private, and personal service. So as opposed to, say, an agency sending somebody who you don't know into your home, to help bathe you or to help you dress or to help feed you or prepare your meals, the consumer has a choice of who's coming into their home and when. Oftentimes, if you have somebody coming from an agency, the agency says, here's who we're going to send and here's what time. And you have to kind of build your schedule around what time they're sending someone to your home. Right. Again, somebody who you may not know, you may not speak the same language. They may not be open to taking your direction. So the PCA program is unique in that it's consumer controlled, consumer directed. The consumer decides who they're going to hire to come into their home.
And likewise, who they're going to fire.
Right, and see, that's the thing. And so, when we say consumer controlled, consumer directed, that means that the consumer is responsible for doing all of those things, right? So they have to recruit a PCA, interview the PCA, train the PCA, schedule the hours, There's timesheets. PCAs get paid every 2 weeks. Ensure that the hours that they worked are what matches on the timesheet. Sign off authorizing that timesheet, and then submit it so that the PCA can be paid. So it's consumer controlled, consumer directed.
I just want to interrupt for a second. It's just to clarify, the consumer is he or she runs the program, but who is the PCA paid by?
The PCA is paid by Mass Health. That's what's the Mass Health PCA program.
Right.
So the funds come from Mass Health. So that's why someone has to be eligible to have Mass Health standard, and the other criteria. And it has to be prescribed by a physician that's agreeing that there's a level of need that requires hands-on service, and that the person does indeed have a permanent or chronic disability.
Who are people? So, I guess we should start. So you're talking about the eligibility, Mass Health standard, Common Health are eligibilities, and the two. Are there any other eligibility criteria for that, and the need for the assistance of two areas of activities of daily living? Are those the only? So for
primarily, well, you know what? Let me start from the beginning. I'll walk you through the whole process. Okay. So we have a consumer. Say somebody wants to access PCA services, so they call an independent living center or a PCM. We happen to be a PCM. That stands for Personal Care Management Agency. Okay. So someone calls. They speak to an information referral specialist, and they're going to be asked a series of questions. Do you have Mass Health? What's your Mass Health number? What's your permanent or chronic disability that requires hands-on care? And then it gets forwarded to my department, the PCA department. At that point, we do a double check of the eligibility, because sometimes people call and they do have Mass Health, but they don't have the right Mass Health to access the program. So they might have Mass Health Safety Net or something like that, but you have to have Mass Health standard. So we do an additional check of the Mass Health eligibility. Once that person has been deemed eligible for Mass Health, we then would send out what's called a personal care skills trainer. So somebody from my department would then go to the consumer's home. They'd set up an appointment to do an intake. So they'd go meet with the consumer, verify that they have a permanent or chronic disability, but also assess whether they can, direct the program, because it's consumer directed. Not everybody can do that, right? So my staff goes out to assess, can this person, do they have the capacity to hire, fire, train, schedule.
Okay, so that's what you mean by direct the program.
Yeah, they have to direct the program. And so my staff will go out, and they're called skills trainers, because they're working with the person to determine if they have the skills to be able to manage the program. And even after they get approved, they're still available to assist them and to provide them with skills training on how to successfully manage their program. So they call in, it gets referred to my department, we check the eligibility. Skills trainer goes out to the consumer's home, which is a Mass Health requirement. You have to be assessed in your home where the services will be provided. So skills trainer goes to the consumer's home. There's a lot of paperwork. So you go over all the paperwork, make sure that the consumer understands the program. If it seems like the consumer can self-direct, then we proceed, and it goes to a nurse in an OT. If they can't self-direct, or maybe there's some aspect of the program, they say they may be able to do everything, but they don't have the capacity to fill out the timesheets or to sign the timesheets. Say they have a mobility impairment. That doesn't mean they're not eligible. They can bring in a surrogate, a friend, family member, to assist them with either all of the aspects of the running of the program or even some. So sometimes when people think, oh, I have a surrogate, that means the surrogate runs every aspect of the program. That's not the case. Each person has a tailored surrogate agreement that lays out what the consumer is in charge of doing to running the program, and then what the surrogate, friend or family member that they select, and then also assess, would this person be a good surrogate?
And that
Can't be
surrogate
somebody who lives in Maine or anything.
And that surrogate is not paid.
No, it's not a paid position.
It's a volunteer helping out.
Yeah, and that's why it's often a friend or a family member. Or sometimes there's, surrogate, they can get a case manager through an agency. Bcil, we're an independent living center. We don't provide case management, because all of our services are pretty much consumer controlled and consumer directed. So we don't have social workers or anything like that. But we'll send out a skills trainer to help assess that. So let's say that for the purposes of this example, that the consumer can run all of the aspects of the program on their own. Once that happens, then it's assigned to a nurse. So a nurse and an occupational therapist are then sent to the consumer's home. Again, Mass Health requires that assessment to be done in a home as well, to assess how much hands-on needs the person has. And so they make a recommendation for a number of hours per week of like hands-on assistance that the consumer needs. And even that assessment is pretty detailed in the sense that they have to calculate how much time it takes for, like, say the person needs assistance with feeding 3 times a day. How long does that take? Toileting, how long does that take?
Right.
So the questions, they seem somewhat ridiculous if you're not a person with a disability, because it's things you don't have to think about, but they're literally calculating time. If you need assistance to go to the bathroom, how many times do you go to the bathroom in a day? How many times, do you shower? How many meals do you eat? Do you eat snacks? Do you need assistance with those snacks? How many, so there's a lot to it. So they write all of that up in this assessment tool that's provided to us by MassHealth. So for the initial evaluation, the nurse that we send out, she has to sign off on it. And the OT, the occupational therapist, here's the recommendation that we're making to MassHealth. It's ultimately MassHealth who approves it. So once that application is completed, it then goes to the consumer's physician, that the physician, he or she, signs off that they're agreeing with the assessment and the recommendation of hours that my staff have come up with. And from there, it goes to MassHealth.
And MassHealth can either deny
Well,
it.
MassHealth can usually do one of 3 things. They can approve it. So suppose that my nurse and my occupational therapist go out and they assess the consumer as needing 40 hours a week of hands-on care for bathing, dressing, grooming. There's instrumental activities of daily living also, so things like meal prep, laundry, shopping, housekeeping. So suppose my nurse and my OT come up with 40 hours a week for the recommendation. The nurse signs off on it, the 40 hours makes sense. The occupational therapist signs off, the 40 hours makes sense in their assessment. And then it goes to the consumer's physician. Physician signs off on it. Once MassHealth gets it, it goes to what's called the PAU, the Prior Authorization Unit. And they have a team of nurses and from a variety of different disciplines, and they review it. And then they'll do one of 3 things. They can approve it. We might ask for 40, and they approve it for 40 hours. They may modify it, and they say, well, some of these requests seem excessive. They may say, the time that you're asking for bathing takes longer than what's average for somebody with that particular disability or situation. So they may modify it. So we may ask for 40, they may approve 35. Or they can deny it. Sometimes people are eligible at the time that they apply, but then for some reason lose their MassHealth eligibility. And if it's at the prior authorization unit and they somehow lose their eligibility, then it's a wash, they'll deny it. And sometimes they'll defer it, they'll ask questions, they'll ask us, well, how come you're asking for this as opposed to that? How come you're asking for so much time? They might ask for additional documentation. We provide it, and then they make a determination.
So if we have a viewer today who's either sitting in a nursing home or sitting at home and they need assistance getting dressed in the morning, or a son or a daughter of a elderly parent in that situation, who can either one of those people make the referral?
Sure. We have many people who are self-referred. So a person realizes that their disability has progressed to the point where they need hands-on assistance, or they have a newly diagnosed disability that requires hands-on assistance. There's been a change in their own functional ability. They can call a PCM agency and refer themselves. Sometimes suppose somebody has a motor vehicle accident, they end up in a facility, they go to rehab, and then a discharge planner may call and say, hey, this person is going to be discharging soon, and they look like a good candidate for PCA services to assist them in the home because now there's been a change in their functional ability. But people can refer themselves. It can be a social worker, it could be a caretaker, it could be a discharge planner from a facility.
Or it could be a child or whomever, any family member. Give my viewers an idea of the average age of a personal care attendant consumer.
It really varies. I mean, we have youth on the program, and then we have folks that are classified as elderly that also utilize the PCA program. So it really kind of is across the spectrum. You know what I mean?
Is there any? Are most people coming out of a facility, or most people living at home having their husband take care of them, and now there's an opportunity to hire a personal care attendant to do that?
It's really a mix.
Is there a mix?
We do get a fair amount of referrals from places like Spalding Rehab, things like that. A lot of folks who have had some kind of medical event that has now, say somebody has a stroke, and they've lost some level of functional ability and can no longer dress themselves, can no longer feed themselves, can no longer bathe themselves. We certainly get referrals from those places. We also have folks who may move here from another state and maybe they had PCA services where they were, and so they moved here, and they need that same level of service to live independently here. Sometimes it's folks who, have a disability, they're living at home, friends and family members are helping them. They may not be aware of the PCA program, and then they may hear about it and say, hey, that would work for me. So,
If you were talking about running the program and folks, and I just wanted to interrupt myself and tell you that Cortland Towns III is my guest. He is the Deputy Director and Personal Care Attendant Program Manager at the Boston Center for Independent Living. My name is Andrew Foreman. This is Disability Connections, and our telephone number is 617-708-3290. We'd love to entertain any calls, questions for Cortland about the personal care attendant program. Sounds like a pretty fantastic program. If someone disagrees with their ability to run the program, what do they do? I mean, if one of the personal care attendant skills trainers comes in and says, it's my opinion that you can't run the program, that you can't, I don't know, do the pay sheets and and they
usually there'd have to be some information that would give the person that idea. So, suppose the person is running the program fine initially, but then they have a series of, say, overbilling. So by that I mean, if Mass Health approves you for 40 hours a week, that you can hire PCAs to assist you with, but then you're billing 50 hours a week. You're overbilling the number of hours that you're approved for. That's typically an indication that you're not running the program well. Now, sometimes those are things that can be corrected. And in fact, the first year that someone's approved for the program, typically Mass Health approves the initial evaluation for 1 year. And then at the end of that year, you have to have a nurse come back out again to evaluate you again to see, do you need that same level of hands-on assistance? Do you need more? Do you need less?
So it could change.
It can change, right.
40 to 42.
But during the first year that someone's utilizing PCA services, Mass Health requires quarterly face-to-face visits because they recognize it's a big endeavor, right? So you may not have ever been an employer before. So say you get 60 hours a week and you have 3 PCAs now that you're hiring and managing and scheduling and dealing with the communication with, scheduling who's going to get what hours, what time this person's supposed to work. If somebody calls out sick, what's your backup plan to make sure that you have the hands-on needs met. So I think Mass Health recognizes that during the first year, a consumer of the program might need more help, might need more assistance. So because of that, they require quarterly face-to-face visits. So the first year that's somebody's on the program, they can call the skills trainer when they have questions or they're struggling with any aspect of the program. But they're also going to get, every 3 months, they're going to get a face-to-face sit-down visit with the skills trainer to determine how are things going, are there any issues, are there any problems. Sometimes someone in the beginning of being on the program doesn't need a surrogate. I've had folks that have been on the program 3 or 4 years, but then they have an additional stroke or they have some deterioration in their cognitive ability where they were able to manage the program previously, but now they're having difficulty. Sometimes the consumer themselves recognizes, hey, I'm not able to sign the timesheets anymore, or I'm becoming more forgetful, or my condition is such that I just don't want to be bothered with it because I'm just worried about concerned about my health or whatever. And so they identify somebody who can be there. Sometimes there's a disagreement, and they can appeal any of those. Sure. Any decision can be appealed. Okay. So there's sometimes a consumer may say, well, I don't think I need a surrogate. I think I can do the timesheets. Oftentimes we'll have a third party, a different skills trainer sit down and say, okay, well, can you demonstrate the timesheets? Sometimes you have folks who overbill on purpose. They say, I know I only get 40 hours, but they feel Mass Health should have approved them for more, and they continually overbill. But that means before their prior authorization ends out, they're going to run out of time. So that's not effectively managing your program.
So there's no, so it's Mass Health, which is an insurance company, but there's no open enrollment or anything like it. Anybody can refer themselves or be referred. Correct. Any time of the year.
Correct.
Today, tomorrow, whatever.
Yeah, if they're eligible, if they have a permanent or chronic disability that requires hands-on assistance with at least 2 activities of daily living,
those are the only requirements.
Then those are the requirements. And they have to have, Mass Health standard. Now, sometimes folks will call us and they'll say, well, I really need help, but they only have one need. They might have, they can do everything but
get dressed.
But get dressed. Unfortunately, they're not going to be able to access the Mass Health PCA program.
So that program may not be appropriate for them.
Correct. They're not going to be eligible for it. Now, there may be folks who exceed the income limit for to be on Mass Health. So they may be working, but they still need hands-on assistance. You know, it's a novel concept. People with disabilities actually go out and go to work every day, and people often don't see us like that in that light. But if someone, you know, they're over income to qualify for Mass Health, there's another mechanism called Common Health that they can access PCA services for. Through that mechanism, Mass Health looks at what your income is, and they base the premium that you have to pay to access PCA services on what your income is. And people use PCAs for more than just coming to their home and getting them dressed for the day. Oftentimes, you know, I work at an independent living center, so I'd say probably over 50% of our staff are people with disabilities, right? So I have folks who come to work every day because they have a PCA that's assisting them, helping them transfer them out of bed every morning, getting them dressed, and out the door.
And
so PCAs help them to be able to go to work and
if
to
they
contribute.
didn't have that service, they couldn't go to work and go work at the center.
Absolutely.
Give us your contact information is under your picture here. But for those of us who are visually impaired or whatever, how does someone make a contact and make a referral?
They simply call our agency, the Boston Center for Independent Living. Our number is 617-338-6665. They'll call, they'll speak to an information and referral specialist. It's useful if they have, you know, they're going to be asked a series of questions, as I mentioned earlier. So, you know, they're going to need, you know, your name, where do you live, you know, date of birth, what's your primary disability that requires a hands-on assistance, what do you need assistance with, are you eligible for Mass Health, what's your Mass Health number. But just calling a PCM agency, that's what starts the process.
Okay, so they contact you, they contact us. One quick question before we say goodbye. You mentioned there were 1,200 people on the personal care attendant program through the Boston Center for Independent Living. Is those numbers growing because the population, you know, you always hear about baby boomers growing,
Yeah.
getting older? Is that?
I think it's a combination of more folks being aware of the services, you know, and so therefore more people are attempting to access the services. There's also folks who maybe had services through a different entity that wasn't Mass Health, that like maybe they had homemaker services or things like that. And, you know, if there's a waiting list or they no longer have, you know, access to homemaker services, they may try to move over and get PCA services.
Cool.
Unfortunately, oftentimes the folks who need just only light housekeeping, they're not going to qualify because, again, you know, it's for folks who would need assistance with bathing themselves, dressing themselves, toileting themselves, that don't have the physical ability to do that. But I'd be remiss, I want to make sure for folks that may be watching and may be interested in working as a PCA, you know, there's ways to do that too. A lot of folks advertise in the newspaper, they advertise on Craigslist, things like that, but there's actually a directory. So there's folks that are looking to work as a PCA, they utilize the directory, and the great thing is, people who are on the program that are looking for PCAs also use the same directory.
You know what, I'm gonna have to cut it there. You know, we were joking outside about doing it for an hour. We could have done this for an hour.
We could have done it for an hour.
We could have done it for an hour. My guest today, Cortland Towns III, the Deputy Director and the Personal Care Attendant Manager for the Boston Center for Independent Living. My name is Andrew Foreman. This has been Disability Connections. Thanks for watching.